Hey, David Raffoff here. I just wanted to talk to you a bit today about software delivery. There's a ton of dynamics that go into this, and there's lots of different ways to approach it. I'm not going to be able to cover, basically only be able to scratch the surface here in a video, but I wanted to kind of talk through some of the basics, and then also show you some techniques you can use on your team, and kind of some levers you can pull essentially to you know change how you go about delivering software. So one of the kind of common ways to do manage the day-to-day work for a lot of software engineering teams is with agile methodologies or lean manufacturing principles. And one of the tools that gets used there is called Kanban. And it literally just means like a board. It's the name of like a board for tracking the process that was used, I think, popularized in Japan by Toyota, but actually predated that. It was used in the UK, but it's kind of been picked up for software engineering. And you've probably seen maybe like a Trello board or Clubhouse or something like that. There's different tools that you can use to manage this, but essentially it's a focus on being able to visualize what work the team is doing, what potential work there is to do, like tracking what state that's in, and with an emphasis on keeping inventory low. And the idea of inventory with software might seem a little unnatural or weird at first, but there's a lot of pretty good analogies to what happens in normal manufacturing, and I'm going to go through some of that here in this video. And analogies are always from software to real world things are always a little bit rough, but I think they're actually pretty good in this example. So I'll go through some of those. So I'm just going to switch over here to a view. If you're interested to, you can always look up, read a little bit more about Kanban on Wikipedia, and there's a number of good books. But just as a software engineer, one thing that you're gonna see probably, especially if you're working in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area or something, that's pretty common to use this kind of flow. So here we have a Kanban board, and this is just an example. I'm actually going to change this up as we go through it, but this is a pretty common way to represent things. So what you might do at your daily stand-up with your team is go through a board like this, or if you have like a planning meeting also, you might go through a board like this. And what the board's representing here is on the left here we have a column that's the backlog, and that's the potential work you could be doing that's available to work on. Sometimes too you'll see a prioritized list after the backlog that are maybe the next 3 or 4 or however many most important things from the backlog to work on. And then engineers will typically, it could be anybody on the team, it could be designers, engineers, anybody that's making something or creating inventory essentially in this analogy, would grab work from here. Some teams have these as essentially a combined thing where you just pull from the top of the backlog. But there's a ton of different ways to do this, so I'm just going to give you a simple example here. But so in this example, let's say you would pick up cards to work on from here, and then I'll just grab one of these and pull it through the process as an illustration. So it's prioritized at this point. Maybe as an engineer completes a piece of work, they might look for what the next thing is that they want to do, and they look over here, and if something's prioritized and it looks relevant to them, they could pick that up. Typically in a team too, you would see you can essentially assign people to cards, so you might see somebody's face on the card, or if you picked it up, you would put your face on the card. And that's helpful just because at any point anybody on the team can come back and look at this board and know what everybody's working on, and if they have questions, they can go to the person who's working on it. If they have new information, which is not uncommon. So yeah, I mean, as you're going through your day, so maybe I come in the morning, I have my stand-up meeting, I report that I'm done with whatever it is that I'm doing. I come back here and just grab this and I say, yep, this is what I'm working on. I'm working on task A, and maybe I'm working on that for half a day or a day or something. Something that you'll see too a lot is, and Trello makes this really easy, so does Clubhouse. Just you can also kind of like add notes about things you're learning, or maybe like a link to the code or whatever that you're doing for the card. So if people are curious, they can go take a look at that. Because part of what's good about this board too is you can kind of radiate out information and status on things you're working on. And then whenever it's, say you're an engineer and you're coding a solution to this, when you think the code's, ready and you've tested it, both written test and manually tested it to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do, you could just pick it up and bring it over here and say, hey guys, this is, or hey team, this is ready for review. And then whenever somebody on your team is available, they can come through and look at the code and, give you comments on it, tell you if something should change or if it looks good, they can go through. And then this is a good signal too, because if somebody on your team finishes whatever they're currently doing, or they're waiting or something like that, they can come here and say, okay, there's a card here I see that's basically blocked. It can't make it through the process until somebody else helps out with it. And so, that's a signal to them to go in and take a look at it. And we'll get more into prioritizing what to do here in a minute. But assuming somebody comes in and they do that review, and you can see that, then and they approve it, you could pull it over here for if you have a QA person that you're working with, or a QA step in your process, or maybe it's even like stakeholder verification, whatever it is, you can have somebody that's interested take a look at it before you actually release it to customers. And again, this is another step where you're depending on somebody else in your team to unblock you. So this is a good signal for like when that person's free, they can come back and look at this board and they can say, hey, I see that I'm probably blocking this work from getting delivered to customers, so I should probably do something about that. And then whenever they've, say it passed QA, just best case, say it passed QA, then whoever did the quality assurance work on it, or if it was stakeholder verification, whoever approved it, could just say, hey, this card looks good, it's ready to release, and I'm going to pull it over here. And then that's also a signal back to the person who originally did the work, that everything looks good and this can go out and you can deliver it to customers. And ideally, if you're in a continuous integration, continuous deployment environment, that's a signal to maybe recheck to make sure that the code is still releasable, like it doesn't have conflicts with what's currently released. Just because if you're in a big team, the code that's live in production is constantly getting updated. So even when you hit the step, you may still need to go and kind of resolve conflicts or whatever in the code before you're ready to release it. But assuming there's no conflicts, you could just say, okay, I'm ready to release it. I'm going to, depending on your process, basically merge it to your release, either your release or to master if you have a hot master, and then try to get it out as soon as your organization can to put it in front of customers. I've been pretty fortunate to work at places where master was hot. So when you have a feature that's ready, if you merge it into master, basically by like merging your pull request, it would trigger a build and essentially make it in front of customers within a limited number of minutes. And part of this this process is to encourage not having a bunch of work that's just sitting around for a long time, and trying to emphasize completing versus starting work. So this is really good in any kind of environment, but in a continuous integration, continuous deployment workflow, it's even better, because as soon as something's been QA'd or verified, or however your organization handles it, you can just go ahead and get it released and get it in front of customers. Do some monitoring on it. So yeah, that's another interesting thing too. Is just because you've released something, and this is probably true for physical manufacturing, doesn't mean that you're done. Like there still could be issues that come up after something's released. So oftentimes too, you'll see like monitoring or needs monitoring column after this as well, where you can move something after it's been released. And maybe maybe for software it's like half a day or a day or something without having any major performance problems or bug reports or user issues or whatever. So that's kind of the basic flow of the board. I've worked on a lot of different teams, and the steps vary a lot from one team to another. But that's the general flow of how a board might work. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about this is you can really use the board to control, to be deliberate about how your team works. So you'll notice I have these little numbers next to all of these columns here. These are represent what are like called work in progress limits or WIP limits. And that's a number you use to be really intentional about how much work you can have in that state. So, for example, here in the prioritized column, I've got a 4. That means at any point, there shouldn't be more than 4 cards in here that are ready to pick up. And there's different reasons for that. So it might be a little more clear once you get beyond prioritized to see why this is important. But imagine you had, you also notice I have these WIP limits next to every column here. So if you imagine you had a team of, say you only have 2 engineers on your team, and you had a WIP limit of 3 in progress. So in this example, I'm going to pull this back to ready for review. So in this scenario, there's 2 engineers. I'm one of them. I've gotten task A code complete, and I'm just waiting for the other engineer on the team to review it, right? So the other engineer is probably also working on something. So let's say they have task B, and I come in and say, hey, I'm stuck. I can't do anything with task A. The other engineer is busy on task B, so I'm just going to go ahead and bring in task C, right? And then one of us completes whatever it was we were working on. We move that over here. And then because, so at this point we've hit the WIP limit of 2 on ready for review, so we shouldn't be bringing anything else into there. And then the other engineer may come in and say, all right, I'm going to pick up the next thing. And, both of us are working on this. And then at some point, one of us finishes and we look and we say, well, shoot, the limit here is 2. So even though I may be done with my task here, I'm actually blocked by the process. I'm blocked by the WIP limits on the board. And even though the state of the thing I'm working on is technically ready for review, I'm not going to bring it over here because that's going to break this limit. So it's a little counterintuitive at first. The board is a reflection of the process you're trying to enforce, not necessarily the actual state of the individual cards. So, if I was to bring this over here, I'd be breaking that limit, and then it's not actually serving a purpose. Like anybody could just bring over stuff that's ready for review, and you could keep pulling in things that are in progress. So you really want to honor the limits, or else they're kind of pointless. But what's interesting about that is it becomes a forcing function. So because the limit is 2, and I can't really do anything with this, even this essentially from an engineer's perspective, like completed work, it forces you to come over here and actually start reviewing code. So, it essentially limits you from creating more inventory or things that are being worked on, and encourages you to focus on actually like getting things through the process. And another thing that can happen is things could move backwards. So say the second engineer came in to look at my work and said, nope, like I totally disagree with how this was done, or I have or maybe they just had some, minor suggestion for something to change. Well, they've reviewed it, so it's not really ready for review anymore. There's work to do on it, so this stuff can bounce back. So you can actually end up with more things in a column than the WIP limit going backwards. Different teams handle this different ways, but this is typically how the teams I've been on have done it. And then similarly here, imagine this was ready for review again. It looked good. We send it through to QA. This thing's ready for review. Both of these get reviewed, but the QA engineer is still, either hasn't looked at this or is currently looking at it. Well, you can't pull these cards forward to QA because you would be breaking the WIP limit here. So what this would do would be encourage you to start working with whoever your QA engineer is to, do whatever you can to help them be able to QA it. So that might be, making sure that the code's up and working correctly on a QA server where they can check it out, and that you've actually, gone through what you think are the right things to check and documented those. Or maybe it's just having a conversation and letting them know, like maybe they're busy with something else, they're doing training or, working on their own thing. Maybe it's just reaching out and saying, hey, the team's essentially blocked on the process, on the workflow, because you haven't had a chance to look at this. But in general, the way that these WIP limits work is by keeping them lower than what the team could be doing at any given point, it encourages you to keep moving work through the process and focusing on completing work instead of just stacking up more and more cards. If you didn't have limits here at all, you could just eventually end up in a situation where, you have all kinds of stuff that's in progress. Maybe, and this actually isn't uncommon when limits aren't in place, to see like an engineer doing 2 or 3 things at the same time. Like maybe they started one thing and then a bug came in, and then some other high priority thing came in. And if this is the situation that you get into when you're going through like a daily stand-up, or just when somebody comes in and looks at the board, they can see right away, like, this doesn't even make sense. Like, we have one person doing 3 different things at the same time. Like that doesn't, one person just can't be working on that many things at the same time. So with this kind of visualization, it makes it really easy to ask good questions and kind of monitor the state of the team. A lot of times what I would do as a team member or a team lead is, if I see like somebody's working on 3 or 4 things, I'm like, which one are you actually which one are you going to complete first, and just for now, pull the other ones back, maybe to prioritized, that you're not actually working on at the moment. And that way it becomes really clear, like, what's the thing that they're focused on. And if, for example, if I had free time, maybe I could jump in and help them, like, try to finish that one faster, or like pick up, one of these other things that maybe they started looking at but just don't have time to get to. So yeah, it just overall really helps with focus and keeping the number of focusing on completing work versus just starting work. And the bigger the pieces of work are, the more important this is. So, if task D is something that might take like 5 days or something, you don't want to have like one person doing 3 different things that are each going to take 5 days. Like, that's just crazy. Nobody can be focused on 3 different things that are that big at the same time. And I would say in general, like, another thing that is very useful in this process is to really try to break down work as much as possible. Like, in an ideal world, to me, these tasks would be things that take like half a day or a day or maybe like 2 days. Once they start getting above 2 days, it gets a little sketchy, in my opinion. But there are truly some things that can't be broken down any further, so it's not totally avoidable. And then another kind of measurement you can use to like monitor the health of a team that's often used with this kind of workflow is cycle time. And cycle time's the time it takes from when that card is picked up to when it's shipped and completed. So with using a Kanban process with WIP limits, generally that should encourage your cycle times to get smaller and smaller. And that's important because it lets you know on average if something came up that was really high priority to a customer, or for whatever reason, if something came up and the company decided or the team decided that was the highest priority thing, it gives you a rough idea of how long it's going to take you to get that piece of work from it being started to being completed. Now, obviously, that could vary a lot depending on like the size of the request, but nothing's perfect, so it's just a good general kind of like a rule of thumb, I guess, basically for a team to see kind of how healthy it is, how fast it can deliver something from start to finish. And that's not meant to be a pressure on forcing the team to push out more and more bigger work. It's more just being able to measure realistically like what a team can get through given the history of how they're working. And there's a lot more like theory and other ways to track those kind of things that I just don't have time to get to in a video like this. But that I would say generally that's kind of the idea of Kanban and how to use it. Just off the top of my head too, there's some really interesting things you can use these WIP limits for in a team. So, for example, if you have a team, say you have like 6 engineers on your team, if you have a limit of in progress of 3, you're basically forcing half of the engineers on the team to be doing something else besides starting new work. So that means at any given point, you could have 3 cards in progress where 2 engineers are pairing on each of those, which in my opinion is a totally valid thing to do. You could also be in a situation where maybe there's only 3 individual there's 3 engineers individually working on 3 separate cards, and the other 3 engineers are doing things like reviewing code or helping QA figure out how to get something out. They could be trying to release work that's completed. They could be going through the prioritized work or the backlog and making sure that stuff looks good and it's ready to go and it's well understood. Potentially even like researching some of it, adding notes, talking to the right people to make sure that the work's really ready to go. And then like the other thing that comes out of this is just slack time. So it may be totally valid to say you're completely at capacity. It may make sense to, instead of just picking up the next piece of work, to just do something else, like just take some slack time, go read about something, go, write a blog post, maybe put together like a presentation. There's all these things that you always want to do when you're on a team that aren't directly about delivering work. And instead of trying to set aside like a specific day of the week or event or whatever, you can use WIP limits to kind of force people to have slack time here and there where they're doing other things that are not about creating inventory or delivering customer facing work. So just you can really play around with these numbers to get different dynamics in a team. Generally, I'd say if you're not doing this already, like people will be uncomfortable with setting these numbers low. But I think that's actually where it gets useful and interesting. So if you were thinking about introducing this to your team, and say you maybe have like, I don't know, just you go with 6 engineers again on your team, I would encourage you to introduce maybe your highest WIP limit to be like 4 or maybe even 3 on any of these columns at any point. And just try it as an experiment. People will be uncomfortable with it. Anytime that I've been on teams where we've introduced these, initially people are a little skeptical of it. But I would say on the whole, it's been pretty well received on all the teams I've used this with. But it's a give and take. There's always opportunity to tweak these numbers and try experiment different things over time. But I hope you found this interesting. I really encourage you to give this a shot. I've used it probably on 7 or 8 teams at this point. and had really good experiences with it. I would say the times where I've kind of forgotten about this when starting a team and not used it, definitely gotten into situations where there was just too much work and flight at any given point. And I do think it'll help you with your daily stand-ups, like really understanding what somebody is going to be working on that day versus just saying, oh, I got like 5 things I'm doing, and then it's totally unclear to everybody which one's the highest priority, or like what the state of the other ones are, or like how people can help out with those. So yeah, in general, I've had really good experiences with it. Yeah, I hope this was helpful. I've actually written a blog post when I was at user testing about this that I may link in here. But I think I've pretty much covered most of what's in there. But yeah, if you have any questions about this, feel free to leave a comment below. Yeah, I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are, what your experiences are. Have you used WIP limits? How'd you like them? How'd your team react when you started using them, or what'd you think of them when you first saw them? It'd be cool to hear about that. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.